All right, cool. Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris Flick here, Chris and Friends podcast, episode number 15. Today, I'm here with my friend Megan Cannon, sports psychologist. Um, Hello, Megan. How are you?
Doing well, Chris. Thanks for
Good.
having me on.
Yeah. So I think we did this a few years ago, so it's been about 5 years. And I remember I had my daughter with me. She's now in kindergarten. She's 6. At the time, she was probably just like, I don't even know if she was 1. So it has
She's
been a while,
baby.
but I feel, yeah. But I feel like you're still, we're still kind of in that same line of work, but just kind of evolving and expanding into more cool stuff. So before we kind of get into the important question, you want to give us a quick background on just kind of who you are and how you got basically
Sure.
life experiences that kind of led you into the work that you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, no, I grew up in the world of sport. I swam, I played softball, I danced, and so it was just like a world that was very familiar to me. Um, I didn't have the language of now looking back at it, and I think I had like a premature retirement from softball because it was very anxiety producing for me. I was always so afraid of making mistakes, then missing the ball, and like just the fun got sucked out of it, and kind of same with swim. And so I wish I knew now what I did, or wish I knew then what I know now. But anyway, went to college, studied psychology, and then I went and got my PhD in clinical psychology. And at the school that I was at, they happened to have a sports psych program. And I was able to do a rotation in that clinic for one of my practicum years. And it was this like fusion of two worlds that I knew, that like sport world that I was familiar with and grew up with and knew my whole life, then meeting this at the time more recent space of psychology and like the combination of the two. So I had the opportunity to work with the athletes on campus there, and it for me just felt like a much better fit than the other areas of psych that I had the opportunity to explore. So after I got licensed, I dove into that space. And so I now own and operate a sports psychology practice where I have the ability to meet with athletes virtually. So I have, athletes, we're both in Pennsylvania, but I have athletes across the country doing some performance stuff. And I also get to consult with teams, which is a lot of fun, in addition to speaking at conferences and just really bringing that knowledge and skill set, or teaching that skill set to athletes, coaches, and then also sport parents, which I think is an area that, sport parents, they always put out so much, but they don't really get a lot back. And so, yeah, that's, I guess, in a nutshell what I do. And now, sort of this new phase in my career is I know the value of these resources and tools. It's just stuff that we don't teach. However, the accessibility of those resources, especially when you get, to like Division 2 and 3 college and also high school, like those resources just aren't really accessible. They're not really available. So a new push that I've been doing for the last several months is taking what someone would get in a series of meetings, 5, 6, 7, 8 individual meetings, and putting that information or content together in a way that they can watch it, online programming, they can watch it at their own time, have it forever as a resource, but ultimately it's a much more accessible option, not only from a time perspective, but a price perspective as well. So just trying to, ultimately I believe in sport, and I
Yeah.
believe at, and what it can provide for people. And so that's kind of my goal, is to hopefully have an impact in it.
So I think, one thing that I think I kind of heard was like, I sometimes try to, just be a little bit introspective and like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And I talked to somebody before, and it was always that line that's like, be the person that you needed when you were growing up. Is it kind of a little
Hmm.
bit of that with you too, where you're like, man, when I was 15, 16, 17, I always feel like that's a time where I always like thought about the driver's license. When kids get close to that age, they always hit like a fork, and they're going to hit a lot of those forks. But I don't know if you make that, I don't want to say the right and wrong stuff, but if you make a decision early that sends you down a path, it could kind of put you in a hole that takes you a couple decades to come out to when you're in your 30s or 40s. And you're like,
Hmm.
man, I wish I had this or that. But so I kind of think about that too. It sounds like that was your background. And I wanted to say also about the sports parent stuff, right? I mean, I don't know. How do you navigate that, right? I mean, do you approach a team and like, hey, I'll open this up to parents as well? Are you marketing to parents kind of as individuals, or how does that work, or what does that look like?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So whenever I go in and work with a team, I
Yeah,
always will offer like, hey, just no fee, like like nothing extra. Like I
Yeah,
am so happy to talk with your parents. Because and then, and with some of my online programming now too, I have one that's just for sport parents of,
yeah, that's
just
great.
tips and things to, parent today's student athletes. Because, I think sport parents are some of the most invested individuals. I don't know many people that would choose to get up at 4 in the morning to drive
Right.
somebody to a pool or spend their Saturdays and Sundays of the summer, going to tournaments and waking up at God knows what time, like they're so
Yeah,
invested and they're in it and they're so passionate. And I think giving them some resources of, they all they're trying to do is help their kid, but they don't always like have the right tools. I compare it to, if I was to do someone's taxes, like I would really want to, I would try to do a good job, but
yeah,
I don't know that area or that space, right? And so inherently, I'd probably make a couple mistakes. I probably wouldn't ask the right things or look for the right stuff because I just don't know.
right.
Even though I'd be wanting to try and do a good job. So I think just giving them some resources because that's a role that's, you know, yes, when I say new for them, they could be doing it for 10 years, but still it's a role that they're taking on. And I think sometimes we expect that parents just like know what to do. But we're all just trying to figure everything out. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a resource I try to offer to the teams if they want that for their parents, and I'm happy to do it.
So I think too, like, I don't know, I don't want to be like super negative, but I feel like the people that might need that the most might have they might just think that they know, they might think they are that tax expert, and they might not actively seek out. So that
Yep.
seems to be a tricky thing where it's like the people that might need it most might not be as open or willing to hear what you have to say. I think about a sport like football or baseball, where it's like if somebody grew up playing it, they think that they have the tools to maybe teach the skill, but there's a lot more to sport than just kind of teaching how to swing a bat, right? I mean, there's a lot more now with, I mean, you talked about some of the anxieties that you had. I had the same stuff, right? You create these storylines in your head, right? And most of the time they don't come true. But managing that stuff is really important. I think with kids now, there's all these other things going on that makes the world a little bit more crazy. But I also wanted to ask, why do you think there's that drive with parents, that rush, right? I mean, even with like, I said my daughter was in kindergarten, right? There's like people get concerned about stuff. It's is she reading yet? Is she doing this yet? Or why isn't that going on? Why is there such a rush to like get somewhere? It's like the rush to
Yeah.
nowhere sometimes. Do you have
Oh,
anything on that? Like
100%.
when you got the 8-year old going to all of these sport practices, do you ever I mean, do you have these conversations with parents like, hey, we're overscheduled here? You know what
Yeah.
anxiety, what yeah. Anyway, any thoughts on this, or like how do you manage stuff like that? If say I had a friend that was overbooking, overscheduling, it's like how do you navigate that conversation? If you have anything for us anyway here.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think it gets, our society as a whole has just gotten so much more competitive. And it's like, the best schools, the best this, the best that.
Yeah,
And it's like, oh my gosh. And so you're seeing it trickle down to then like kindergarten, right? Of like, and I think in sport, there's a lot of like parent peer pressure of, oh, well, we have these practices, but I'm also doing this strength and conditioning and we're taking them to this trainer and we're doing this. And I think parents at their core just want to provide the best, like if they want to provide all of the resources they can for their kids, right? So it's like if that person's doing it and that's going to be helpful for my kid, I'm going to do whatever I can do to help my kid get that resource as well. But then it bumps into the overscheduling and so one of my favorite stories of an athlete I worked with like several years ago. She was a softball player, she was a pitcher, and doing all the lessons and the things, and she was talented, but she at this moment in time we were working to get, she might have been 13 or 14 years old. And the one day we had a meeting, and before the meeting started her parents were like, we just want to let you know before you get started that she just quit. So just putting that out there before your meeting starts, right? So she and I get in there and I'm like, so what's up, man? Like, what are you doing? She was like, this weekend my best friend had her birthday party and I was able to go to the mall at nighttime, but then there was a sleepover and I wasn't able to go to the sleepover because I had hitting lessons in the morning. And you know that all of the good stuff and all of the jokes like happen at the sleepover. I'm not doing it anymore, so I'm done. So here you have this 13-year-old girl who that was her way of exerting power, right? She's like, I quit. I'm done.
yeah,
And so it was then we had a bigger conversation with her parents where it was like, well, so it sounds like you really still like want to do this, but you want to be able to go to the sleepovers, you want to do these fun things. What if, instead of having these lessons once a week, maybe they are scaled back and free, and they came to a good compromise. And her dad kind of was like, kind of let his hand off, or let his foot off the gas a little. And fast forward, she's now playing collegiate softball and reaching her goals. And so I think, you know yes, sport is important, but and like we want to, but at the same time, so is being a kid,
Yeah.
and it's okay for them to miss practices, to go to a sleepover, or not have like this less like, yeah. So I think it is a really tricky thing to navigate. And oftentimes with parents, I'll tell that story just of like, you know, let's take a step back and sort of put things into perspective of like, why are we here in the first place,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you think it's to have your kid go pro or get the scholarship, it's like, oh, okay, well, you and like 100 million other parents out there are all fighting for the same spot. And so the probability of it, not to be negative, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, it's
Just look
not
at
the
the
financial plan for college. It's not like, that's not what sport is anymore. Um, we need to just, yeah, kind of relax.
So, yeah, and with that too, it's hard for me. I do phys ed work, and also I work with middle school kids, and we call it health, right? But it's really just me trying to get these kids thinking about, we're having a project now. They choose the topic, they're going to write the book on it: reduce anxiety, sleeping better, nutrition, conditioning. We had 17 options that they wanted to focus on. They picked one. Kids could do multiple things, yada yada yada. One thing that I found though was like there was something that came up where a mother wanted her daughter to not to kind of define herself, kind of like body image stuff. So it's okay to have the cookie, it's okay to have some cake and stuff like that. But now this girl's in middle school and she's like, is it really okay for that? Is it really okay to eat food that's like, I know it's not healthy for me? Like, why is the message that it's okay for me to have it? And I was just like, hey, do you ever have this conversation with your mom? And she was like, oh no, like knowing that it wouldn't go over well. It sounds like that girl, that softball player, maybe could have had that conversation. Is that like is there an issue communication? How to encourage better communication with parents and stuff like that between kid and parent. Is that kind of in your toolbox too? Like, because I think there's a big gap there where it's like kids almost feel maybe their parents might react to things sometimes or whatever it is, but every kid has their own dynamic. But I just feel like sometimes an open communication with a parent might allow them to sit back and realize, hey, maybe we are doing too much, and maybe we can take the gas
Yeah.
off. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think yeah, like there is that, right? And I think also sometimes too, like kind of like with kids, right? Like their parents will be like, sometimes in meetings or after meetings, like their parents will be like, oh my gosh, like I'm paying you to literally say what I have said to them, like so many
yeah, yeah,
times,
yeah.
but because
That's my
you're
job too.
saying it,
Yeah,
right? Like because you're saying it, they're going to listen. And so I think there's also that as well, where like to parents, right? Where even if their kids are like, oh, well, what if we don't want to do this? But like I think sometimes it takes hearing it from someone else of like,
yeah.
is that really the best thing? Can't
That's
we
my
do a
whole
little bit
job.
of balance, right? Like, and so I think there's room for more communication with the kid and parent, but also I think sometimes the hearing it from somebody else can be a little bit more impactful, especially like, in the sport world, or like some of the bubble that their parents can be in, because like you're on the sidelines hearing everybody else and what they're doing, and like it's just like you get wrapped up in it, and it's
Yeah.
very easy to get wrapped up in.
There's a guy that I know that, he is no dummy, but he's telling me like his 10-year-old daughter's got to like, well, hey, everybody else is playing, 3/4 of the year they're doing this and that. And I was just like, that's not the best thing for him. He didn't want to even entertain the idea because he thinks there's going to be some sort of drop off in skill. But it's I don't know. I think I lean more towards being a generalist when they're young rather than a specialist, right? And it's like you
Oh,
spoke
100%.
and I don't know where I was listening to something, but you talked about something that I bring up often with did you say that I think it was like Kate Leddy, or there was an SB performance where they were like playing the piano and all this other
Yeah.
stuff? Did you share that story? So, somebody that she's a runner, and she read recently like, we got to have multiple rooms because if one room gets destroyed, then what? Like, where do you go? And I was thinking back too. There's a great book it's like a historical fiction book about the 300 Spartans, and I was like, even with the mental side of things, it's like there's some rooms that we shouldn't go in: fear, anxiety, stress. Like these were things leading into this battle. But I thought that that was a good way to even think about the mental side of things too, where I guess there's two things going on here. One, I would like to talk about not defining yourself by that sport. And there's that academic example with the Ivy League schools and the rates of depression being much higher there because some of these kids define themselves as being the top student, and And then there's athletes that are also there. If they have a second thing, they realize that the rates of depression were lower in the kids that had two things. If they were in a club or the band or were on a sport team, they realized that those rates of depression were lower. So can you share that swimming story or the Despi story just because I forget what it was? And then
Yeah,
talk about
well,
the importance of multiple things.
yeah, well, and it's very like specialization we're seeing earlier, and like I'll ask, and my first meeting with every athlete, I always ask, like, what else do you like to do? And the amount, not every kid, but the amount of athletes that are just like, well, I don't have time. And this is like, I go to the gym like for my sport and like work out. And I'm just like, you need other stuff for that
Yeah,
reason, right? Or identity, because God forbid you get an injury, right? And you're
yeah,
done. And so
yeah.
now
Done.
what, right? What do you have? And the story was, a couple years ago at the ESPYs, you have two of like arguably like two of like the well, Kate Ledecky, right? Who she's still actively competing, is gonna crush it this summer, at Paris. Like, so she's one of our best athletes. And then Elizabeth Beisel, who has had two, maybe three, definitely two, if not three, Olympic campaigns. She was named captain of the swim team, one of the years that her second or final Olympic appearance. Um, and they're at the ESPYs and they performed. Kate's playing piano, Elizabeth is playing her, I don't know if it's a violin or fiddle, I'm not really sure. I
Yeah,
can't tell the difference. But right, so you have these two women who are clearly like at the top level in their sport and they do other stuff, and I
I
like
do.
follow them like both online, and like Elizabeth is now retired, but she, plays with bands sometimes. She still swims. Like she has a very healthy relationship with her sport, which I think sometimes not only when we're specializing early, college coaches don't want the kids that specialized when they were 10 because they're like, we
Yeah,
want you here for 4 years. We don't want you here showing up on our campus burnt out.
yeah.
And so, not to mention like the burnout rate, but also with injury, right? If we're doing the same thing over and over and over again and you're not developing other parts of your body, the overuse injuries that have happened in these last like decade have just exponentially increased. And so it's like, you know,
I think you hit it.
specializing, tough,
And it's a
not easy.
healthy relationship with the sport. There's this, I forget what the documentary called. I don't want to say it's like the Way of Champions, but it interviewed, I definitely remember Wayne Gretzky being on there, a lot of these other high achievers. And Gretzky's just like, I never had to go to practice. Like I always wanted to. I went out to the pond and I just shot on my own. It's like what I wanted to do. And then when baseball season came around, like I still had that same interest, but it wasn't like there was nothing forced going on. It was, and I wonder with those swimmers if like, them just taking the time to practice the piano where it's unstructured time seems to be lost with kids. Most of these sports now, it's clubs, it's nothing. I mean, I've never played uh I've never played a minute of basketball in like an organized team event, but I probably played thousands of games growing up because we just would get together and play basketball all the time.
Yeah.
And like, there's other examples. I mean, whether it's street hockey or just getting together for like flag foot or touch football in the park, like I don't know if this
Yeah.
stuff goes
Sandlot
on anymore.
style.
Yeah, yeah. So there's an overemphasis on the structured side of things. Kids, and then I think sport performance is affected by that because they don't feel comfortable trying things, right? They always have somebody over watching. And I heard boy, do you know Jonathan Haidt? Coddling of the American Mind was his book. He
Mm-mm.
just wrote something else, but he's just like, kids now could be tracked on their phones. This was the example, right? So he compared this to if you're taking a test and there's the teacher's looking over your shoulder, you're going to perform less because of the anxiety of having like the teacher looking over you. And I don't know, he might have cited a study for that, but I always feel like that happens with sport too, where when you always have a parent overwatching, you always have a teacher there, you always have a coach there. You might not take the chance because you're like, well, I don't know, I'll just do what the coach wants me to do here, and it kind of keeps you in a little box here. And I think in other countries, they're out playing whatever soccer, like Lionel Messi, for example. I mean, I'm sure he
Yeah.
played these thousands of hours of just trying things, and that's why he's creative on the soccer field. Even think with wrestling in the past. I just talked to a guy, Ben Chunko, and these guys taught me 10 years ago about play wrestling. And they're like, it's been going on for decades, but you just play around. You're at 70, 80%. The guy gives you a little resistance and you try stuff, and that's it. Like, it doesn't have, there's like a certain flow to it. And it's like, it doesn't have to be, we're just going to drill, right? There's going to be a little, hey,
Mhm.
try some techniques out, see what works for you, things like that. I feel like I'm rambling on here, but I guess the idea would be this like, we have to remove a little bit of structure sometimes and let the kids kind
Yeah.
of explore and have some fun. Sorry,
Absolutely.
I just went in like 19 different directions. I do want to go back to the room thing too, where it's like Now there's some rooms that we don't want to go into before we have a meet, right? Say we are talking swimming. I'm in track and field now. Someone like yesterday, for example, girl throws just automatically shaking her head like this, right? And I get frustrated with it because I'm like, we're not even at a level, we're not even at your near your best physical level. It's like there's absolutely no way to get frustrated about something that we're still kind of playing around with and trying to learn. So those negative thoughts, having the anxiety, is there ways that we can manage getting prepared for an event? I mean, is there like a small little, hey, you could talk to somebody for 15 minutes before a big swim meet?
Yeah.
Is there
Or
like three
any
things?
of those things.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Like sometimes it's the talking with other people. It's also like having, athletes that kind of have a routine that they believe that works for them, whether that includes music or certain stretching or like breathing, or for some athletes, like they love talking to people before and that's helpful for them. But others are like, they like to be in their bubble and they don't want, and so I think like and utilizing practice when you're at practice to not only practice that skill, but also some of those routines. And
yeah,
I always am such a fan of like, I'm always telling these athletes, I'm like, write stuff down. Like you show up at your sport with physical equipment. We should have physical brain equipment because in those moments when we get stressed, like humans don't think the best. Like that's not a secret. It's like science. Like when we are escalated, we are not the most logical and rational. And it can be very easy to 3 days before your meet sit there and be like, well, this is what I'm doing well. This is what I know about it. But on that day, it might be a little bit more challenging to think of that. And so having some tools that are written down either in a physical notebook or on your phone if it has to be, which is totally fine if that's what's with you, of what are things that you've been doing well. I always encourage athletes after your practice, write 3 things you did well that day. And you do that,
yeah,
takes 2 minutes most days. Fast forward a month from now when you have a meet, you now have a list of all these things that you've done well, evidence to support the fact that like you have the skills necessary to get out there and execute your desired behavior that day. Yes, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Anxiety at the base level of it's fear or unease of the unknown. Back to the storylines you mentioned, right? Our brain will fill in those unknowns. How am I going to do today? Well, you're probably going to suck. Like it most often just goes
yeah,
negative. And so having like, yeah, we can't jump ahead in time and see how the meet's going to go and then come back to now and then live it. However, even though you don't know how it's going to end, there's so many things going into it. So it's another list or a tool that you can have with you is like, what do I know? I know how I warm up. I know my routines. This is what I know I've been sleeping, training. This is what I know I'm better at. This is generally how the meet goes. This is who I spend time with. I've been at this facility before. I know where these things are. I've competed at this particular meet before. So here's the things I know about it. Like those unknowns and the stress, like, yeah, they're going to pop into our head, but it's what do we do with it? And so having some of those things with you to
yeah.
help redirect those thoughts into a direction that's just a little bit more helpful can be very
We,
valuable.
yeah. The thing that you said about three things that went well, we had I, I'm glad that you said that because I kind of forgot about that whole idea. I mean, I did a class earlier in there, and it was like the anxiety thing, and it was to get these middle school kids to be like, write down one thing that went well today, then in the last week, then in the last month, and then the school year. Um, it was just a tool that we used, and I kind of forgot about that. And I was like, I can probably apply that to the kids that I'm working with now, right? Where it's like, yeah, you might be frustrated, you might have had a bad day, but how about we just shift the mind, right? Let's think about something that did go good today. I
Mhm.
thought that was, thank you for that reminder, I guess is what I'm saying. And you said about the unknowns. I mean, again, at this track meet yesterday, there was two things that happened. One, this guy, one of our guys, was getting ready to throw the discus. He ended up winning, not on this throw, but he won the event. But his last throw was the worst throw. The groundhog kind of ran right into the discus throwing area, and right as he was stepping in there, getting set up, right. So that was an unknown. And then he went in and was kind of laughing and all that, but he couldn't get himself recentered to throw another big one because that one just kind of flushed him. Another one, there's some. I'm coaching the throwers, which is why it's all throwing examples. In the shot put area, the people that were running it were like yelling at the fans for like making noise or walking by. Like this is going to distract the throwers, and I'm sitting there thinking like they need to be able to block this out. I mean, you might go to the district event and there might be noise and there might be people walking by, and you need to quiet the noise. So any kind of tools, any kind of ideas. I mean, is it having the checklist? Is it having routine that kind of helps you in those situations, or you
Yeah,
know,
and that's such a good point, right? I mean, athletic events are very rarely silent, I
yeah,
mean, maybe golf, but like that's really And so, starting off with like kind of having some practice in a quiet space, whether that's at practice, and it is sort of like a quote quiet afternoon or area where it's like, hey guys, we're gonna like do this exercise and we're gonna challenge ourselves. I'm such a fan of like using your senses, really grounding yourself to that moment. And for each person, a different sense, or even focusing on their breath, like a different thing for them. I have one of my golfers, for her sense of sight is the thing that's like the most like anchoring and like centering for her. She'll just randomly pick a color and then just like look around and try to find anything in that color. I have others who like, they're like, my sense of sight's just too much. So they'll close their eyes, they'll breathe, and they'll like focus on what they can hear, and it's practicing those things before you get to competition in some of those like more quiet spaces, and then we can over time kind of add a little bit of noise, add a little bit of distractions, because our brains as human beings, even when we're trying to like do our best to focus, like our attention's going to shift. It's just they do naturally, and that's not a problem, because then we just shift it back. We have a
Yeah,
lot more control over our thoughts when we're choosing to do it. And we can shift our thoughts back, and then our thoughts go somewhere else immediately. Okay, might be a little frustrating. That's fine. We're not doing anything wrong. We don't suck at it. Our brain is just doing its thing. So we can just bring it back. And so I think that's where, at practices, or even for these athletes, like at home, it's like spend 5 minutes, just do this,
yeah.
practice it,
Yeah.
so that then when you're in those environments where it is louder, there is more going on, and you have also internally probably a little bit more going on than just like sitting in your room. Well, now you've kind of built up that skill a little bit, and it's like not your first time doing it.
Yeah. And I imagine visualization in that environment would help us too, right? If you're just kind of
Yeah.
like, if you are sitting at home one day and you could think about what it's going to be like if you're trying to win a district title in something, somebody might throw a big, have a big throw right before you. There might be cheers, there might be that pressure put on. But if you could kind of see
Hmm.
yourself going through those motions, I know you talked previously about, visualization. I know that that is still important, but um, I just don't know how that's put into practice. I don't know too many high school coaches or just kids in general that's even on the radar. Um,
Yep.
and I'm always fascinated. I try to read a lot, and I always see these like old quotes, right, from like these from thousands of years ago. And this guy Epictetus is like BC time, and he's like, if somebody succeeds in provoking you, then it's kind of it's on you, right? It's like that's not his quote, right? But if somebody succeeds in annoying you or whatever it may be, right, then it's your response to that provoking that
Hmm.
kind of makes or breaks the situation. I always wonder how these people, it's like I don't know, it's thousands of years ago, and like they figured it out then, but we still struggle with it now.
Right.
It's like part of the human wiring, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
It always blows my mind. Now before too we talked oh, I always like to bring this up. This is my new thing now. I just watched this thing about Nike, and swimming has the whole thing with like the gear you wear matters. So they came out with this shoe in like 2015. Have you seen that running shoe? They started smashing records in like 2016. It's a little thicker. It had like a carbon fiber type thing in there. So they were able to get a little bit more of like a rebound off the ground. So the running economy, their efficiency went up with less energy expended. All of
Hmm.
these records start to break. So um, the problem is that it was supposed to be available for everybody, and it wasn't for a few years, and that's when these records got smashed. And some people missed out on the Olympics because of it, and that's a lot of money for these athletes. And so I mean, with the sport of swimming, anyway, the coach then eventually finds himself getting suspended for something else, right? I talked in the last podcast about coaching always trying to like push it, push the boundaries, so to speak, right? Um, this guy
Yeah.
this guy Alberto Salazar is trying to create advantages for his runners to make it right. I mean, um, I don't even know if I have a question in here other than the fact that like, what do you see in the field that you are in terms of like keeping things, with character or, following the rules and stuff like that, trying to find shortcuts. Like, how do you navigate stuff like this? I mean,
Yeah.
any of that come up or do you work with people where you have to kind of like, or any of those coaches or anything like coming to you, or is it more just like,
I feel
um,
like those are the coaches that would not come to you. And
yeah,
that whole
yeah, that's what
Nike
I'm thinking
project
too.
thing is,
Yeah.
that thing is such a gong show. I refuse to wear Nike. Like it's just, and they take their
Okay.
sponsorships away from female athletes and they get pregnant. Like I have such this like
Yeah, that was
with
part of it.
Nike. Yeah. And like, and they have demonstrated themselves, in my opinion, time and time again to just have dropped the ball. Um, But, and I think that's where we're losing sight of sport, right? When you look
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
Houston Astros and they're reading signs, and it's like, and that's where at the end of it, and people that go into sport, there has to be at the base of it respect for the game, right? And like, we can develop technology, and we can, swimming, it's happening too, like in terms of these suits that they have are like they repel water, they like, and you can only, they're so expensive and you can only wear them for like 5 times, and then it's like, all right, you got to get another $800 suit like for racing. And so the technology is very cool and it's helping, as long as it's like, I mean, $800 for a swimsuit is not like financially accessible for everybody, but at least like
yeah,
everybody is out to it. And I think um whether it's, we get the pressure to perform, and for some coaches, right, like it's their livelihood, like they need to perform or they get fired, right? And so we can kind of then create this dynamic where it's like, well, let's see what we can get away with, which is such a shame, because at the end of the day, right, if we want sport to live on in like the pure way that it is, we need to respect the game.
yeah,
And that's like it's a big emphasis, in some of like the sport spaces of just like, okay, we can do all these things, but at the end of it, like, we have to respect the game, and respecting the game is following the rules, it's abiding by the rules, it's respecting the others in it, including the officials and other coaches and the like our teammates and opponents. And and I think some people, unfortunately, they like lose sight over that.
yeah. And then I think some of the high achievers too, like I think they just described a Michael Jordan or Tom Brady yelling at their coaches, things like that, where they almost have like you wouldn't want your child to act in that way. And like some of these high achievers have this like I think the guy said it was like maladaptive, behavior where they just they're like the 1% of the 1%, right? But I feel like a lot of times we try to model ourselves after that. You might see like David
Mhm.
Goggins training, and you think like, hey, I got to go do this, but really it's like I don't know. You might want to run a 5K first before you start. Going on these. You don't need the sauna and the cold plunge right now because
Right.
you're not doing anything throughout the day. And I feel like sometimes we just see maybe it's that whole it's the internet. A lot of things more exposed to us now,
Yeah.
um, and then kids see it too, and it kind of sets them potentially on a wrong path. So I guess it needs people like you out there kind of keep doing your thing, right? To
Yeah.
hopefully spread the good word. Hey, this is what I was talking about too. Like with the overgeneralization and the specialization, we've known for decades that like specializing too soon is going to cause a premature peak, most likely. Why does that message just get ignored? Does anybody have
It's a
any
great
ideas?
question.
Like, I know, seriously, I don't get it. I
Yeah.
don't get it.
I don't know. It's
And you
it,
talk,
it it honestly boggles my mind. And it's not that like the research isn't out there, right? It's not
yeah,
that
no,
there's
it's,
not college coaches of like interviews of like, no, we actually like it when they don't specialize super young. And oh my gosh, dude, I've literally had the amount of athletes that I've worked with ACL tears, and then some that get back, and then they tear another one, like months, like right after, and you want to talk about like the stress of that. And it's just
yeah,
like, we know these things, people are preaching the message. I don't know why it doesn't get listened to.
yeah.
I don't know. That's
I
actually
mean,
a really awesome question, 'cause it honestly is mind blowing. Now I know there are some coaches out there, and they aren't necessarily preaching the generalization message, and it's like, well, if you don't, play club or don't do this, or if you're still doing this other sport, it's going to impact your playing time, and like, that's rude. And so I have heard of some coaches that have
that's
given some
rude. Yeah,
athletes those messages, and I'm like, dude, come
that's
on,
just
man. Like,
immature. It's immature and selfish. Actually, it's
yeah,
very selfish and it's childish.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't get that part. I mean, I stopped coaching football a couple years ago because there was a lot of that going on, and we're starting to some of the coaches and stuff would say things about these kids. And I'm just like, geez, they're 15. Like, you want to challenge their toughness, their manhood, call them this and that. And I'm just like, it's a game.
Right.
And I don't,
They can't
yeah,
even drive. Like, what are we doing?
I know. And
They
that was
can't
really
vote.
frustrating.
Like, they can't, like, what do you, who are you trying to prove
God,
yourself against? Some like 16-year-old kid. Does that make you feel tough? Like,
and there's stuff going on now where I'm like, there's kids driving to Philly for like a soccer practice, like the suburbs, and it's like
yeah,
37 degrees, and they're starting at 7:30 at night, and I'm just like, what? So then you have that carrying over into the sleep aspect of stuff, right? And kids are
yeah,
probably overscheduled. We touched on it. Kids are being
yeah,
tired. Kids are on things. We talked. I mean, you talked too about just the social media side of things, right? And how does that affect just being like the screen time, and how does that affect performance? I know you spoke on that before.
Association with like, because mental health is ultimately, I think some, it's like, oh, mental health, bad thing. It's like, no, 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 no. You have physical health,
Yeah.
right? And you can be physically in ill health or physically good health. Well, mentally, we can be in mental good health or mental ill health. And to do some of these things, like we need that foundation, and we know social media just kind of takes a hit on that. There's actually this study that was done in like NBA playoff time several years ago where they were looking at like late night tweeting, which was, they defined it as if they saw people engaging after 11 p.m. and then they looked
Yeah.
at their stats the next day and their stats were down and compared to the people that didn't. So I mean, there's just, yeah, there's a lot that they, it's just not helpful. And I always like encourage the athletes of like, hey, if you control what you can control, right? If you're controlling your sleep, your food, your hydration, well, that should also be on the list of something think about in relation to your performance routine, like, and in competition. Because you pick up that phone, you don't know what's, it could be like the best message or notification ever, or it could be something so stressful and now you're about to go compete, and now you just, all of your training, you've just like now thrown this little wrench in and you
Yeah.
did it to yourself. And
The heart,
so like,
heart rate.
it's just one of those controllables. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you get that message, notification, whatever, heart rate gets spiked, or something stressful. Hey, your dad can't make it, your girlfriend, boyfriend can't make it. And then now instead of thinking about, say, I'll just use a track example, your next throw, your mind goes somewhere else and it's negative and it doesn't serve. And there was, it might have been like a celebrity story, but it was like this mom challenged her 13-year-old daughter that was like, if you could find me one good study about getting a cell phone and being on social media, I will let you get it. And the study doesn't exist, because it's
So is she
just
18
not.
with no phone still?
Yeah, no, the study doesn't exist. So I don't know. She may
No.
never get a phone. But I wanted to bring up wait, where are we here? So we talked about that. The have and the had nots, right? You talked about the swimming suit. I feel like, with the club sports and stuff like that, some families that even just township football, for example, there's a family that has three boys, and these boys could use a little bit of structure in their after school hours. There was a study in Iceland where they gave families, I think it was the equivalent of maybe $280. Let's just round it up to 300 dollars for recreation activities. And what they found was like, teenage drinking went from like 38% down to like 8%, all because
Right.
they gave some money out to the kids so that they could then
Yeah.
participate in recreation activities. You start pricing kids out, and sometimes the families that need it don't get the opportunities. And
100%.
there's really no question in here other than the fact that I guess there's just an overemphasis that we kind of both agree on about yeah, and then kids get priced out and all of that
Mhm.
stuff, right? And unfortunately,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a solution out there. I like what Iceland did. I always wanted to, in my mind, I'm like, I always wanted to do something like that around here, you know, where
Yeah.
I'm like, why don't we
Well,
get
you're
these kids
absolutely,
and trying to
absolutely.
navigate, this will be my nonprofit brainstorming, then maybe you can help me. So,
Yeah. No, I
so you
actually
might,
was talking with, I was at I was speaking at a coaches conference this weekend, and one of the emphasis of this conference was, there's a 70% drop
yeah,
when athletes get to the age 13 of sport. And we know that it's helpful for decreasing teenage pregnancy, decreasing alcohol and drug use. Like it's a good after school structured activity,
yeah,
but sport now is a $30 billion industry, youth sports, 30 billion.
that's nuts.
So this professionalization of youth sport, not only is something that's driving a lot of well, specialization and all this nutty stuff, but also like I'm a parent, I can go start a club and make some money, right? And I can charge whatever I want to charge. And
Especially if your
um,
kid is the best in the area, right? Like, hey, I got the best player. I'll start this club. Kids will come play with them, and
yeah, and then
then
boxing out, and even I was talking with another coach and they were talking about how like their baseball coach, how even renting the fields
yeah,
is just the prices are increasing. So now you're looking at these like small programs or rec programs that, in the fields, and the coach was like, it's not even like they're doing anything to it. Like they
right.
haven't improved this field, in however many years, but we're now having to pay even more money. And so there is this there is this cost component even when we're looking at the rec sport, which shame on sport culture for like looking down on rec sport, because I think rec sport is amazing and it's so
Yeah,
fun. It's like, well, if you're not in club, it's not serious. It's like, hey, rude. Um, it's an awesome opportunity, but now, yeah, it's yeah, and they're the second person in a week that has mentioned like, I almost wonder if there's this nonprofit opportunity here where, it's if you're interested in playing something like this, an organization can help with the fees of, the sport if you want to try it out,
yeah.
because we're
Right.
we're losing
I,
kids, and our engagement in sport has dropped, and it has not come back from a pre-COVID rate.
yeah.
People just aren't
They-
signing up anymore.
It's like a 5 to 8% decrease, and only getting like a 1% back. Is that kind of what you're saying? It's not.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I was going with where I was talking about having like there's like this cycle of clubs, right? Where we got a good group of girls that are great at lacrosse, so we have the club now, and then they're the elite club, and then those girls then move on to college, and then there's no replacement of talent in that club. So then like the next club opens up, and it's just like this weird thing. And I'll ask kids who they're playing, and I'm just like, oh, okay, you're driving 50 minutes to play on like a club that has like college kids coaches. I'm like, maybe you should just take a breather. That's one thing. Track and field, like now that I stumbled into coaching this, I'm like, this could be the sport that has a little bit of something for everybody. If you don't want to
Hmm.
run distance, you could sprint. If you don't want to sprint, you could jump. If you don't want to jump, you could throw something. It's all
Yep.
kinds of body types. It's all kinds of people. So that's kind of where my mind is rolling. You could get a track, hopefully. I know that you probably have to run a track, but I'm just like, maybe we could. I'm gonna kind of maybe just start with like a youth thing here and just try to get kids out running around doing stuff and it's laid back.
Yeah.
It is like you're playing around with some techniques in the beginning. Obviously, there's some coaching points, but it's like, hey, give it a try, figure out what works for you. Anyway,
Right.
that was my thing. That was my new thought anyway, and I've been thinking about this for over a year, and I don't know where I'm going with it yet. So if you have any good ideas, let me know. Um, so I also wanted, I think last time too, we got a couple minutes here, but you brought up something the last time we talked that really probably was opened my eyes at the time, and it's been on my radar since. But I mean, you kind of talked about the boy problem where kids aren't, it's not the culture of like raising a male child. Sometimes it's like they don't handle certain adversities very well. I don't remember what exactly was said, but it was just like they don't take. I mean, teaching a kid how to lose sometimes, but it was under the yeah, I don't know, just I guess being in tune with your emotions and stuff like that, and uh speaking about things. I don't know where I'm going
Yeah.
other than the fact that I'm trying to create basically what led me this is like deaths of despair, right? It's like my age group, white males, alcohol,
Yeah.
suicide, depression. It's like
Yeah.
doubling every 2 or 3 years, right? And I'm
Yeah.
starting to think like, these are things that these kids need to kind of get implanted in their minds when they're younger. I think sport could be a good avenue for that, but it's kind of like my age group, my demographic now that they're struggling with alcohol, they're struggling with depression, suicide, all of that stuff, right? Um, I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if you got anything on that topic other than there's just something we touched on
Yeah.
before.
No, I think it's we definitely socialize men and women differently in terms of emotion, where it's like, oh, girls, like you're, even though they'll call you crazy for it, but like you're more able to be sad or admit that you're upset. Where with boys, it's like, oh, you pussy, and so, but
Yeah,
and it we don't, when we're talking about emotional intelligence and the emotional IQ, the EQ, things we know about it, and this is what's so ridiculous, right? Where it's like EQ is double, two times the predictor of future success for people. You could be the smartest person in the room, but if you have the lowest IQ, that is going to block your success. If you cannot read a room, you're like, recognize and see other people's feelings or how you may be influencing them, and even recognizing your emotions and regulating that, like those skills are two times more important and more of a predictor for success, in
yeah.
addition to overall like life happiness, well-being, but these are things we don't emphasize, and it's stuff that in those like older cultures, right, of like, oh, just rub some dirt in it, no crying in baseball, that type of stuff, like those were the messages we got for so long. And they were
That's
not the
probably
right messages, right? And
and
we got
those
to like,
messages they're coming from people that probably have low EQ and they just think that's the way of life, unfortunately.
Yeah, because they're,
That's all
and
they
it's
know.
not to knock on like the older generations, right? I mean, like they just it
Yeah,
wasn't a language, it wasn't what they did. And so even now when you kind of bring it up to some, not all, right? Like they can't even like go there. And so that's also, in my opinion, why I think sport is so awesome is
yeah,
we can safely put kids in these situations that's going to make them stressed, that's going to make them excited, that's going to make them angry, that's going to make them sad, right? And we can be there to teach them how to navigate through it, to label it, to like find what's helpful for them before they leave your house for college, right? And go off into adult
yeah.
world. And so it's an opportunity that when done well, we can really use it to teach a lot of these skills that we know, um, you know, based on the stats that you gave, and just to many others, these skills that we just know we need, but we don't have.
There's a guy that a performance coach, like former Navy SEAL type of thing, might work with USA Soccer or European club. He's just like, my biggest fear is that we don't expose our kids to adversity when they get into college, when they get into the workforce, right? And honestly, I think when you talk about, I think in sports, some talent, you need a little trauma in your life. You need something. You need the adversity. You need something that is going to kind of help build, I guess, who you are, your work ethic, your character, and stuff like that. You need to face some challenges growing up, and um, people complain about kids, right? We'll talk about, oh, but I'm like, we're the ones raising the kids, you know
Yeah.
like, so it's us parents too that have to play a role. It's the teachers, it's the coaches, it's whoever. I mean, it's not just like tell the kid something once. It's like I will have to tell the kid maybe 100,000 times, but it's your job as the teacher or the coach or the parent to keep doing it because it
Right.
might just need that one more time, right? And then
Yeah.
it can flip. So that's one thing too. It's like I don't like blaming kids for anything, but I just think we as adults and role models or whoever is involved is we do need to expose these kids to adversity. We don't need, um, to I don't know. I guess just say have a safe space always. There's going to be
Mhm.
some tough moments out there, and I think we need to build up our ability to handle those tough moments. Uh, one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
A girl that was a gymnast would come in, and I would just based off body language I knew, hey, maybe that didn't feel good seeing her perform an exercise, right? But there's a certain mentality that I think sometimes is it okay to just say, no, it's fine. No, it's fine. I'm like, it's not. I just saw what you did. You can't hold your shoulder after
Right.
something and then say it's fine, right? Um, I guess that's just kind of might just be a culture thing in sports, right? But I just think I'm just bringing up a topic again that's not quite a question, but just to tell kids like, hey, it's okay to have an open line of communication. It's okay to tell me it's
Yeah.
not fine, and we could work
Yeah.
on solutions to kind of fix it. Is there anything like that that you come across and working with even coaches or parents?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right,
Yeah. And I think, and there are certain sports and certain training places
yeah,
um that, yeah,
all right,
that it's like you're not allowed to be injured and you're not allowed. And I've had athletes at some of those places where if they're injured, like they have gotten punished and they had to do rope
yeah,
climbs and these, it's like, so, we're creating like a very toxic relationship. And at this conference this weekend, I learned something that really stood out, which was, they've done research of, some athletes that have had these like very aggressive and toxic coaches. And, those athletes, it was like in basketball, they, even when they were no longer under that particular like more negative coach, they still had more technical fouls, they were still more aggressive players. So ultimately what we know is the long-term impact of having a coach. And that's where coaches are so important, because if you are a coach, and I hear this from my athletes all the time, where they are, well, they're now 16, 17, 18 years old. And they're like, well, the coach that I had when I was like 12, we couldn't, if we were injured, we would get in trouble, or they wouldn't play us, or like whatever, or they just yelled, they did this, they did that. They, they're years beyond that coach, but that coach is still in their head
yeah,
and they take them with them, and so that's where the role of coach has such opportunity, not only of, hey, it's okay that you're hurt, like what's up with your shoulder, like we can talk about, I'm like, it's fine, like,
we could
hey,
work
you
around it.
can run, yeah, like you like
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
just do lower body stuff today, it's not a big
yeah,
deal, like, and navigating and teaching, I think like the role of coach, we sometimes maybe underestimate it and
oh yeah,
underappreciate like the ripple effect that it has in people's lives. because they're long-standing impact, and that can go in a negative direction, but it
Yeah.
also in so many cases can go in such a positive direction. There's lots of athletes with stories of like, I had this one coach this one time and they said this thing to me and it changed my life. One of the coaches this weekend said that like, it's this athlete they've worked with for a few years, whatever, and like they're like, yeah, they were like, it's not like we had any like special relationship or whatever, but this girl like wrote a project about the coach and was like this wrote this paper of how much this like coach meant to her, and he was like blown away. So
Yeah.
he's like, I'm not doing any like the impact that coaches have, the impact that sport can have is so big and so great. And maybe one of the first steps in helping to make sport great again is
Yeah.
helping empower coaches that like you do have, even if you're seeing
Yeah.
like you have the power, and you're the front line of defense oftentimes, and you have the power to really like change this like little human's life in such a good way just by spending 2 hours with them a couple times a week teaching them how to throw a ball. How
Yeah.
cool.
And I was going to say, I did want to ask you this, but we are running short here a little bit. But like defining a coach is kind of that, in my opinion. It's having that rapport. It's asking them about who they are and all that stuff. And you make that connection first, and then instead of like punishing them with something like a kid will be disrespectful and they'll be like, "Oh, you should have them you should have them go over hills." And I'm just like, no, I'm going to talk to him about it, and I'm assuming I expect him to listen to me, right, or her, and eventually just like I'm not asking them to do anything crazy. I just want them to be respectful and to like not do something, right? So I'm like, I want to be able to talk
Yeah.
to this person and have them respect what I'm saying, and like that's it. I'm not going to punish them for something. It's we have to build a line here. We have to figure out what's going to work, other than that, other than just me like imposing punishment on somebody, So I guess that's communicating. And a friend of mine was a runner. I've shared this story a bunch, but she went to college, great runner. She set all kinds of records locally. Her coach was like, "Hey, maybe if you lose a little bit of weight, you might do better at age, 19." She carried that into her 40s, with periods of disordered eating and all that stuff. So coaches have an incredible opportunity to make an impact in a great direction. I mean, I just gave you a terrible direction, right? That's a bad example, but um, it's not a bad example on the impact that you have, I guess, on a kid's life, right?
Right.
So
Right. And the greatest measure of success for a coach is not the wins or losses on the board. It's, do your athletes show up and are they excited to see you?
yeah,
Right.
all right. I think
That's what it is. And there's even in terms of performance, a study where they had feedback from like a stranger, like a big versus a friend. And when it was like feedback from a stranger, people's cortisol levels like shot through the roof after a performance versus if it was like from someone they knew or a friend. And then it was like the cortisol levels were like very minimal and they were able to kind of move forward. And so as a coach, we think that, are you this like stranger yelling at the person, or are you kind of aligned with them and a friend where then you can give them that feedback and they aren't afraid of you. And they, and as a coach, you got to look in the mirror, right? Of, do you really need to yell? Do you have to? And yes, sometimes you do, but like, are they excited to see you when you're giving them feedback? Are they afraid of you? Or are they like, oh, okay, this person, like, he's on my team, he's on my side, he cares about me or she cares about me. Because even when you can give the exact same feedback and they're going to receive it in a much different way, that's helpful for not only them in the moment, but also your team in
yeah,
terms of the future performance of that athlete. And so the relational space is big. And if your kids are excited to see you, like, that is, in my opinion, just in being
yeah,
fortunate to work in the sports space for like a decade now. If your kids are excited to see you, not saying they're excited for practice and all the
yeah,
work they
yeah.
have to do, but they're excited to see you, um, you're winning as a coach.
Good. Man, I forget what I was just going to say there. Um, I think we could probably wrap it up. I think you have an appointment. I was going to chime in on something, but I forget what it was. So I'm not going to attempt to do so. All right.
We
Um,
can always do round two. We can always do part
yeah, I
two.
know. So it was good talking to you.
You
We'll
too.
get this thing out, and yeah, I'll probably remember it the moment that we get off here. So Megan, give us a little bit. What are you up to? What do you got? Anything that you're hyping up? I know you said you got some programs for parents and all that stuff. What else are you up to?
Yeah, yeah. So I got so at my website, drmegancannon.com, you can kind of get linked up, or those online programs are at mvpmindset.com. I have some programs, a Milton Training Starter Kit. I have one all about performance anxiety, one about goal setting, one for raising tomorrow's champion, tips and
Oh yeah,
tools for those sport parents out there who we know you're so invested and you try so hard, here's just some resources we can give you. There will be definitely some more programs on the way, as I have time to kind of build them. And, ultimately, like I said, I believe in sport. I believe in the impact that it can have. And so, whether through individual meetings, I'm happy to link up with athletes
Yeah.
along with team stuff, but also those online programs are there accessible. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Megan Cannon, and Facebook as well, just at my name. And, just to the best of my ability, really try to put resources out as frequently as I have time to, just to, help people have a good place to start.
And I think I do remember what I was going to say. It was let the kids know that they have a voice too, right? I mean, they come to you and you want to have an environment that's open. A kid got annoyed yesterday because I didn't let his buddy throw because he missed practice, and he was going to like say something to me, and then he stopped and held back, and I was just like, no, say it. You got something to say, let me
Yeah,
know what it is, And I think that's important. Just the kids need to know they have a voice. So to do the work that you do, where you can sit down and talk to the kids, I think is an important. Let the parents talking to the parents like, hey, your kids got to feel like they could come to you with things, coaches, stuff like that. I think that's the only way that you could kind of work through and create like a good environment for everybody involved.
I agree.
All right, Megan,
For the
it
love
is
of
time to sign
sports.
up. Yes.
Hey,
Already.
thanks, Chris. It was so good to see
Yes.
you, and thanks for having me.
Same. See you, Megan. Thank you.
Bye.